Hey guys, it's JC Theater Yu-Gi-Oh! And today I'm coming at you with a Magical Musket deck profile. Now, I've loved the concept of Magical Muskets ever since they were first announced, way back when, and I actually bought these all on pre-order. And if you know anything about how hyped these were, I definitely lost a lot of money on this, but for the most part, I definitely have enjoyed the deck a lot. And though I haven't kept it updated with the addition of Magical Musket Max out, now I decided to revisit the deck and see what I could do with it. So without further ado, here's my deck profile. First up, we play arguably one of the most important Magical Musketeers, and that's Magical Musketeer Kaspar. Now, all of the Magical Musketeer main deck level 4 or lower monsters have the same effect, in which during either player's turn you can activate a Magical Musket spell or trap from your hand. And additionally, whenever you activate any spell or trap card within the same column as them, whenever anyone activates a spell or trap card within the same column as them, they have unique effects that activate. And Kaspar's is that you can add a Magical Musket card from your deck to your hand that isn't the same name as the card used to activate his effect. So he's a searcher for not only monsters, but also your Magical Musket spells and traps. The biggest weakness for Magical Muskets in general is the fact that you need a good ratio of monsters to spells and traps, because you want a few monsters on the field and then the spells and traps to back it up. Kind of like the shooters and the bullets kind of concept. So he really helps out, because if you have him, he'll be able to search out a bullet for you, quote unquote, so that way you can actually go off and make some plays with him. So he's very integral to the deck. Additionally, I play 3 Magical Musketeer Kid Brave. Kid Brave's unique effect is that you can discard 1 Magical Musket card from your hand to the graveyard in order to draw 2 cards. So that's definitely good, because he helps you dig deeper into the deck, and because all of the Magical Musket spells and traps are hard once per turns, sometimes it's worth discarding a copy of one that you've already used that turn in order to dig deeper into the deck for more cards that help out plays. Next up, we play 3 Magical Musketeer Doc, and his unique effect is that you can add 1 Magical Musket card from your graveyard back to your hand, except another copy of the card you use to activate his effect with. So that way it'll help you recycle your plays a little more, and it'll help you gain hand advantage, so that way you can have more bullets in your hand to go farther, or you can even recoup a lost monster to play next turn. Next up, we play 3 Magical Musketeer Starfire. Starfire is important because she lets you special summon out a level 4 or lower Magical Musketeer monster from your deck in defense position. So she lets you search out usually Kaspar if you want to go that route to get more bullets, or a level 4 monster in order to go into a rank 4 play. I do play 1 Calamity and 1 Wild. The level 4s aren't the best outside of Starfire, and sometimes they aren't played, but Calamity lets you target 1 Magical Musket monster in your graveyard and special summon it in defense position. So it's kind of a worse Starfire in a way. It does give you some field advantage though. And then Musketeer Wild lets you select 3 Magical Musket cards in your graveyard and shuffle them into the deck to draw 1 card. So he helps you regain resources kind of, but ultimately Wild and Calamity don't come up as much as the other ones. A spicy tech I am running is actually 3 Psychic Wielder. The thing with Psychic Wielder that I actually really like is, even though it goes against the strategy of having just a few Magical Musketeers on the field and then just going into plays using their effects, Psychic Wielder lets you have more access to rank 3 plays as well as level 6 Synchro monsters. He basically gets to be special summoned out onto the field whenever you have a level 3 on the field, and since most of the good Magical Musket monsters are level 3 and we run quite a few of them, I think this is a good little spicy tech to go for a more special summoning from the extra deck route. Now onto the spells and traps. I do play the 1 classic Monster Reborn, 1 classic Foolish Burial, and then 1 Double or Nothing. So let me explain. Monster Reborn, of course, Foolish Burial lets you use Doc's effect to recoup a card back to your hand, as well as it lets you use Calamity's effect to special summon a magical musket from your graveyard back to the field. Another thing to consider in this deck is you have to think of cards that you can play like automatically and don't need any setup, so that way you can activate your magical musket's effects. Additionally, Double or Nothing is in here because we do run the Utopia double package, since it is quite easy to go into a rank 4 because of Starfire. Additionally, I personally really like Ties of the Brethren. It conflicts with this build somewhat because I do enjoy special summoning from the extra deck, but ultimately it's not a requirement in the deck, and Ties of the Brethren just is so good because not only does it pop off the one magical musket you probably have on the field when you activate it, but then you also get 2 more magical muskets on the field, and then hopefully you'll probably have more spells and traps in your hand in order to have those guys get off their effects with those spells and traps. So ultimately, Ties of the Brethren is very good in this deck in particular with the magical musket strategy. Additionally, a spicy option that I saw, which definitely adds a level of strategy to the deck, but it makes it so much faster, is actually Into the Void. A big thing about magical musketeers is that they need their spells and traps in your hand in order to activate their effects during your opponent's turn, so that way you can choose which magical musketeer you want their effects to go off. But I realized that you can kind of think ahead and really just set all your spells and traps, and for instance, there's a magical musket Last Stand, which we'll get to, which lets you basically negate a spell or trap and destroy it. And if you want, like, say your Kaspar to get its effect off, you know your opponent's going to play a spell or trap during their next turn, so you can just set that in Kaspars, or you can just set some other cards behind your other monsters, and you just have to think strategically of what is my opponent going to do, so that way I can get off my effects next turn. Because usually, honestly, especially when it comes to the magical musket cards, you'll be using most of them the next turn. So you just have to consider where you want to put them a little better, but ultimately I think Into the Void definitely helps you dig deeper into the deck, and it's definitely good in my opinion. Additionally, to dig deeper into the deck, I play the 1 Upstart Goblin, and also 2 Pot of Desires. I am iffy about Pot of Desires in this deck because I do run the 1 Double or Nothing as well as other 1-of cards, but because this deck does suffer from not having enough draw power and needing that sweet ratio of some monsters and some spells and traps, it's like a necessary evil at this point. So I reluctantly play it, but it has to be played in this deck. Now onto the magical musket cards themselves. Let me get these out of the way. So first off, I play 3 Steady Hands. Steady Hands lets you target a magical musket monster you control, and its attack and defense become double its original attack and defense until the end of the turn you use it, and it cannot attack directly during the turn you activate it either. It's good as a defensive card, so that way your opponent can't just run over it, and it's also, of course, good as an offensive card to run over your opponent's monsters. And sadly, but of course, it is a hard once per turn. Next up, we play the 3 Cross Domination. If you control a magical musket monster, target 1 face-up monster on the field, and until the end phase, you can change its attack and defense to 0, and it has its effects negated. So it's definitely a very strong card to make an opponent's monster basically nothing. So you can run over it as well as prevent it from using any kind of effect that might hinder any strategy you have going on. I do play these I'm very, very iffy on, and that's the 1 Magical Musket Crooked Crown and 1 Magical Musket Fiendish Deal, because since they are continuous trap cards, once you use them, you can't really use that Magical Musket's Tears effect that you used in that column, because you can't just activate another spell or trap in your monster's column because this is blocking it. Crooked Crown is interesting because you can only control 1 of it, but basically during your main phase, or during either player's main phase, you can special summon a magical musket monster from your hand, and if you do, if the monster zone on your opponent's side of the field in that same column is unused, your opponent can't use it until the end of the turn, even if Crooked Crown leaves the field. So that's actually kind of good, but it's not super good. It just helps you spam out Magical Musketeers a little bit more, and it is an activation, so it's definitely decent. And then Fiendish Deal, magical musket monsters you control cannot be destroyed by card effects, and if Fiendish Deal in your possession is sent to the graveyard by an opponent's card effect, you can add a magical musket card from your deck or graveyard to your hand. Honestly, if your opponent uses a lot of card destruction removal or anything of that nature, they'll definitely want to destroy this first, and then you get a free search or a free recuperation from your graveyard back to your hand. So these are definitely relatively niche, but ultimately very good. Speaking of relatively niche, but ultimately very good, I am playing the one Dancing Needle. This lets you, if you control a magical musket monster, target up to 3 cards in the graveyards and banish them. You would obviously use this on your opponent's turn when they're trying to use plays that involve cards in their graveyard, so you can use this and just banish them out of the way. It's basically an in-house DD Crow. Another thing, though, is if your opponent has any monsters in the graveyard, or any cards in the graveyard for that matter, it says up to 3, so you can target less than that, and you can just target 1 card in your opponent's graveyard and banish it, so that way you just get an effect off by one of your magical musketeers. And then I play the one Desperado. If you control a magical musket monster, you can target 1 face-up card on the field and destroy it. You can, with Dock, recoup this back to your hand, so I don't play more than 1, since just a targeting destruction isn't as good as some of the other cards in this deck, but it is pretty decent. And then finally, a 3-of, I play Magical Musket Last Stand, which negates a spell or trap effect while you control Magical Musket. And you can destroy the card that you negate. Now onto the extra deck. I do play 3 Magical Musketeer Max. Max is a Link 1, and he just requires a level 8 or lower Magical Musketeer monster. So basically, that's any Magical Musketeer in our deck. And he's interesting because when he's Link Summoned, you can activate 1 of 2 effects. You can either add magical musket spells and traps with different names from your deck to your hand, equal to the number of monsters your opponent controls, or you can special summon out magical musketeers from your deck, equal to the number of spell and traps your opponent has on the field. So basically, if your opponent has more monsters on the field, add a bunch of spells and traps, or if they have a lot of back row, you add a bunch of monsters onto your field. Of course, even if they have like an even ratio where you ultimately pick whatever you think you need more, if you have more spells in your hand, then obviously you want more monsters on the field. And if you have a bunch of monsters and no spells, then of course you do the reverse that. Ultimately, this doesn't fix the deck, but it definitely helps out because, like I said, the biggest issue with Magical Muskets is getting that golden ratio drawn of a decent amount of monsters to a decent amount of spells. Next up, for the rest of the extra deck, it's pretty open-ended for me. Some people do play Instant Fusion, and I recommend that because it is a free activation for your Magical Muskets at the cost of 1,000 life points, of course. But you also can get out the Thousand Eyes Restrict, the new one, or the old one. But I don't have any version of it, actually, so I decided not to play it. But I did play just some Nightmare cards, Nightmare Phoenix and Cerberus, as well as for the spicy tech I added in, I have the level 6 Coral Dragon, and then I don't have a copy of it. It actually comes out in Dual Devastator, but I highly recommend, if you go with my spicy tech, to add a Bryonic, Dragon of the Ice Barrier, into the deck, since it is level 6 as well. Some rank 3s I like to use are the Phantom Knights of Breaksword, DDD Stone King Darius, and Super Quantum Mech Beast Grampulse. And then, of course, the Utopia Double Engine, which is number 39 Utopia and Utopia Double. And then just in case you end up doing something wrong where you accidentally banish the double or nothing off the desires or anything like that, I am also running the Utopia the Lightning. I have 2 extra cards in the extra deck, extra blank spaces. I would recommend maybe I think it's called like Hippo Shingen, the generic light link monster with the bottom left and bottom right arrows, or whatever you guys think I'm missing in the deck, just let me know in the comments down below. I really like magical muskets, and though I understand that this deck probably has a lot of problems, especially to those who play the deck much more than I do, but I genuinely believe this is very fun, and ultimately this deck just does a lot, and if you get the right ratio, it actually is quite an interesting play. Since I do have the Into the Void in the deck, I feel sometimes as though you have to strategize kind of like chess or Go or something like that, because columns matter in this deck, and of course usually column mechanics suck unless you're Mech Knights, but even then that might be debatable. But ultimately, Magical Muskets are a really cool deck, and I recommend picking them up if you do find them interesting, because I feel like one day they might actually do something. So thank you so much for watching, guys. Leave any advice down below. Like I said, I'm no expert in the deck, and I will gladly take any advice to hopefully make this deck better for the next time I play it. Thank you so much. I'm JC Theater Yu-Gi-Oh! See ya!